for people who are considering making a pitch with the largest strategic companies that exist, learning from watching somebody else's pitch based on the niche that they're going after in order to be successful. Technology and innovation, very excited to see inventors, investigators, entrepreneurs. That's fascinating, really providing guidance to people and companies and firms and entrepreneurs that want to develop products that address an unmet clinical need.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to The Pitch. But at each of these programs, we're going to be presenting two promising companies that present their technology and as well as their business plan live to this panel. And to see other clips, as I said, you want to go to visit OTW's YouTube page. So here's how this is going to work. So we are going to start with a short video from one of two companies which explains their product and plans. You, the audience, will be able to vote after you've heard the Q&A from my esteemed panel, so stay tuned for that. And finally, if you find any of these companies compelling and would like to contact them yourself, we'll be providing a contact slide at the end of each presentation. So as I said, tonight we have two interesting companies aimed at improving surgical instrumentation, intraoperative monitoring, and customized patient-matched implants to improve clinical outcomes. So without further ado, our first presenter tonight, when I've looked at their business and considered what the opportunity is, it makes me ask the question, what if trauma and spine surgeons had a way to simplify intraoperative management for placement of fixation plates, pedicle screws, and even in the spine, they could perform neuromonitoring with a single disposable device that decreases overall surgical costs. Sounds like a provocative opportunity. So our first pitch is from Christopher Wilson, and his company is Edge Surgical. So let's move on to the video now. Thank you very much.
Edge Surgical has developed the first and only single-use spine all-in-one tap. The all-in-one tap is packaged in a single-use box containing the muscle electrodes, a smart junction box, and the all-in-one tap handpiece. The all-in-one tap has a leading alt-tap for creating a quick and controlled screw-hole pathway. It also has an MIS dilating tube with real-time digital measurement and triggered and continuous EMG neuromonitoring. A quick connect handle with ratcheting capabilities and an easy release cannulated impaction point. Once the patient is anesthetized, an HCP places the muscle electrodes in the appropriate muscle groups correlating to the nerves being operated around. Next, the patient is positioned on the operating table, and the electrodes and all-in-one tap are all connected to the smart junction box and turned on. If any of the electrodes are not connected correctly, the all-in-one tap and smart junction box will indicate an error with a flashing red light and a check electrode display on the handpiece screen instructing the HCP which loose electrode needs to be corrected. The all portion of the device is placed at the entry point of the pedicle and can be malleted for advancement. A 17mm initial depth is displayed on the digital screen, and a flashing green light indicates no triggered EMG nerve detection is occurring. As the surgeon advances the device with the ratcheting handle, if the trajectory begins to veer toward a nerve, the all-in-one tap will indicate this via a flashing red signal and audible notification. The surgeon can also adjust the amount of milliamps to further provide feedback of nerve proximity. Once the surgeon has configured their desired screw pathway via the digital depth measurement and triggered EMG, the surgeon can remove the inner stylet and replace it with a guide wire. Then, the ratcheting handle can be switched to reverse and the all-in-one tap can be removed. A screw is then inserted and the process is repeated until all pedicle screws are properly placed. The all-in-one tap combines several features, providing a safer tool when placing spinal pedicle screws and minimizes the number of surgical steps required.
Fantastic. Why don't we start with the original Audrey Beckman? And Audrey, please take it away.
All right, thank you. Hey, Chris. So I have to start with the regulatory path that you're on. I noticed you're in an IDE path, so I'm curious about what that means timing wise and what your clinical study and clinical data are looking like at this point.
Sure, and I'm not sure you got the IDE aspect from it. We don't need to do any clinical studies. We've had our pre-sub meeting with the FDA. It will be a class 2 510K, traditional 510K pathway. In terms of studies where we offered up an animal study, an acute animal study, and the FDA accepted that. So no clinical studies for this.
All right, great. So what does the timing look like for commercialization?
We are extremely close to submission. And full disclosure, we've been waiting for certain parts to come in with the global supply chain kerfuffle that's been going on. Things have been just slow getting certain parts, particularly electronics. So we have a design freeze. We've done several pilot animal studies in both sheep and pig. Honestly, we need to build about 200 to 250 devices to get this to the finish line. And we're just waiting for parts is the long story short. So we're pretty close. I would say if I was to make a guess, submission in the next 6 months.
Great. And so in terms of the animal study, like what kind of data were you looking at from that? And how does that support your claims that you're trying to make?
Sure. So we're claiming substantial equivalence as a predicate device is the NIM, the Medtronic NIM pack needle and the NIM spine system. So as part of we haven't done our pivotal lab yet, but in terms of our pilot, we're showing equivalence to that product. Basically, putting in screws that we use one side of the vertebrae for our device, the other side for the NIM pack needle and NIM spine neuromonitoring machine, and compare. And the pilot studies for both, basically we're showing that we can, using either instrument by the surgeon, that they come out proper placement of the screw equivalent for both devices, for both our device and the predicate device. And we've been able to show that very clearly in both in both pig and sheep. And again, that's just pilot studies. We haven't done our pivotal yet.
Okay, great. I've got one more, Scott, but I can wait till later if you want to move on.
You know what? We have time, but I'm going to let you stew on that one for a moment. Let's go to Mike.
So congratulations, Chris. That's very cool. And if I understood you right, you're 6 months away from your FDA submission. Okay, so you're pretty early. So when you look at this device, it immediately brings to mind the spine guard device or Pediguard, which is kind of, I appreciate there's some differences. I'd like you to expand on how it's different.
Sure. That's a good question. And you're not the first to ask this, but simply put, it's a different underlying nerve detection technology, whereas spine guard, Pediguard type of technology, we use standard EMG. That's been around for years, so no different than the type of technology used in the like Medtronic NIM or any of those other types of EMG types of devices. So we're using something that's kind of tried and true, the gold standard in terms of nerve detection. And we're very aware. We like what Spine Guard has done. Obviously, they've had some financial. They just got out of bankruptcy, which is great because we like what they're doing. But my co-founder, who was not able to join this evening, he used to sell the Spine Guard device in his previous life, and there was a lot of false positives or false negatives due to the type of impedance technology that's associated with. If there's blood that enters the canal, then that interrupts the impedance aspect of it. So, I'll take a step back and say it's just different nerve monitoring technologies.
Yeah, so it's different. For sure, it's different. Impedance versus sort of conduction, I guess. So one of the things they tout is that they can find cracks in the wall. They can see the impedance change as the cortex cracks if they're starting to drift out of the pedicle. So that's a big sensitivity issue for them in a positive way. Can the EMG technology do the same thing? I mean, clearly it tells you when you're on a nerve, but will it tell you things like you're starting to crack the pedicle, the medial wall?
Well, not using, yeah, it's a good question. Not using impedance, but by the fact we have a digital depth measurement, aspect to the device where you get real time, like how deep is that hole you're going? You get that type of feedback on, you want to get to that 50 to 80 yard line into the pedicle, and that's often determined, preoperatively in terms of several different aspects on how to get to that. But you're no longer kind of guessing that using, if you're using kind of legacy devices or taps or ball tip feeling probes and whatnot, or gear shift probes that have the analog markings on the side of it, you're getting that real-time depth measurement aspect that enables you to understand, what the depth of the all tap is at that point. That's how we address that.
Yeah. Well, I think you'll learn a lot of things as you go. Do you think you'll eliminate the amount of X-ray needed? I mean, because you may not need X-rays to measure length, which is often done, or I guess they read it off the probe.
Yeah, well, depth is always is something that the surgeons want to know and see. And I think the biggest thing for, what the surgeons are really liking that we've put in front of them is the fact that they don't need a technician for neuromonitoring. They don't need the capital equipment. And they don't even need to look up at the technician and ask them for feedback. Everything is right in front of their face. And so for them, they control the process, they control that step, and economically speaking, they get to, reap the revenue benefits of the neuromonitoring step.
That's terrific. Thanks, Chris.
Chris, let me combine two questions, and we'll come to John to bat cleanup, so to speak. You brought up one of the topics I wanted to raise, which is the necessity for another person to manage neuromonitoring. So while on one hand, I think there's cost savings, from my vantage, I've seen a very strong lobby of this group of people who are in the suites, they're in the ASC, they're in the OR, and they want to keep this installed base. So how do you think about managing that, and what will your reimbursement strategy be?
Sure, it's a good question. So whether people like it or not, as more and more procedures go to the surgery center setting, they're going to have to look at costs. Neuromonitoring is a huge cost of that. And that comes not just through the human capital of the technician, but through the actual physical capital of, the piece of capital equipment. Furthermore, investing in things like navigation or robots, it's expensive and maybe not a good fit for this type of setting. So we position our device in the surgery center setting where there's cost conscious, where you don't have to pay and pay for that neuromonitoring technician. And in terms of reimbursement, there's two main buckets. There is kind of your professional component and your technical component. Our device fits in the technical component aspect of reimbursement, and that's where we can help places like surgery centers say, you don't need to hire out the technician or the piece of capital equipment. You don't need to even schedule it. You use our device, and you get to charge out for the technical component of neuromonitoring. And instead of in a previous model, you'd be giving that revenue to the technician or the mom and pop company that's coming in and doing the neuromonitoring. The surgery center gets to keep that revenue themselves.
So with the technical approach, you think you'll be eligible for an existing code and you won't need to go generate a new code?
Correct. And we've hired folks to take a look at that and analyze it. And we feel we have a really good grasp of, where what codes are going to pay out for this. Again, there's a professional component for neuromonitoring and a technical component. We fit in the technical component category.
Good. One more question before we go to John is, I was doing a little bit of homework and I went to the FDA website and tried to find either one of these products because it was sort of pitched as early commercialization. I couldn't find, naturally, now I understand because you haven't filed yet. I couldn't find this, nor could I find the EDG or Edge device that you mentioned is commercially available. So what's the status of that with a 510K? Is it registered in another company's name, or why can't I find that on the FDA website?
You can find it. It's under the company IDOSMed, EIDOS Med. We acquired those assets from the company that did a lot of the early stage stuff for that product, and that's how we have that 510K. So you can certainly look it up. I can certainly provide you the 510K number if needed. But if you look up the company IDOSMed, EIDOS MED, you'll find it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, we'll turn to our newest panelist, who's stepping in for his brother and stepsister Audrey, John Viscogliosi. So please, John.
What did you all see to make you want to start your own company to compete, in this market?
Well, thanks, Sean. Good, very good question. We saw white space in the instrumentation space, meaning a lot of if you go back several decades, a lot of the technology and advancement in this space has been around the implants, whether that's screws, rods, etc. But there's been a little bit of neglect around the instrumentation around this. Obviously, you've seen some advancement there with robots, nav, etc. But for us as a company, we saw a huge opportunity in the instrumentation space, not just because it's a big market and there's huge growth there, but also as I learned from your brother around the regulatory property, RP, it's much easier to get instruments into the market through regulatory as opposed to implants. And so we saw a not only a big market that's been kind of neglected in terms of advancement, but also a market that has a easier road, easier to get over the regulatory hurdle compared to implants. And that's why we got into this space. So to be clear, we don't do implants, we just do instruments.
So in watching your video, and then previously looking on your website, so is there a capital purchase component on that kind of stand area?
No, not at all. What you see in the video probably in the first 10 seconds is the box. That's the entire device. Everything in there is single use. So that is everything you need. So there's no capital equipment. There's no management equipment. It's all single use.
So then it's only good per patient. You can't reprocess it. So it's not multiple use.
Correct. I will say that we are kicking the tires on potentially making the junction box reprocessable. We don't want the facility to manage anything. We want them to take it off the shelf and it's ready to use.
Okay.
And ready to go. But if we've gotten some pushback regarding the junction box being, you really throw this out? We're like, yes, you can. But perhaps we give some sort of rebate if they send it back and we reprocess it, because it doesn't need to be sterile. It doesn't go in the sterile field. So there is some flexibility to reprocessing the junction box aspect, or not. We're still kicking the tires on that.
So are you also making the probe, the instrument, the tap? Is it all in one?
Correct. Yep.
Okay. And then so I'm not an expert in pedicle screws, but on the tap, how do you account for different screw thread pitches and, kind of that? Because my understanding is, the taps come with each. And then what's the impact on, the self-tapping, screws that it seems like a lot of people have moved towards?
That's a good question. So you obviously know a lot about this. This is a very detailed topic that comes up. So we've positioned our tap to work. We position the tap to be designed to work with basically every major manufacturers except for potentially NuVasive, but it works very well. The tap is designed around Medtronic, who's had some interest, Stryker, J&J, and Zimmer Biomet. NuVasive is kind of one we haven't really looked at their taps very closely. But that's how we've looked at our taps. And to be honest, they're all pretty close in terms of their thread pitch and diameter between each thread screw. So there really isn't a lot of difference between those companies. So in terms of the tap, we're pretty close to everybody, particularly Medtronic.
Excellent. I don't want to take up so much time, so I'll leave it at that. Maybe one last question.
We do have a system where everybody comes around one more time for a question.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Fantastic. So, thank you very much, Chris, for this first round. So now it's the time to poll the audience and ask the audience, hey, what do you think from this perspective and what you've learned tonight? Is this a game changer? Is this something that needs a little more work? Do they need to go all the way back to the drawing board? People will take a moment to vote, and then we'll show the results. Okay. Well, what you can see is that at least the 3/4 of the group thinks that this could really be a challenge, but that it needs a little more work and a little more clarification. And I think that's fair. Nice picture. I think that's fair to say. Yep. And now we have an opportunity to sort of come around again. Everybody has one more question. I know that both John and Audrey have held one in reserve. The question that comes to me is, as you think about what you need and the reasons that people come onto the pitch, what is it that you need? Is there something that you're looking for from any of the panelists or anybody that could be watching tonight?
Well, sure. I mean, it's two things in particular. One, we are in the process of raising money, so it's not a huge raise, but that's just throwing that out there as we are going to going out there and raising money. It's always something we want to, tickle the audience with. And secondly, it's just the feedback. I mean, it's good to see. Obviously, I'm biased. I think we got something great, but that's because I'm biased. But it's good to hear. From my perspective, the questions are good, but I also want to hear the blunt force criticism. Like, what am I missing? What needs to be done? And don't hold any punches. Just let me know, because as we have all these experts here on the panel, I take all feedback in to and incorporate that going forward. So those are the two things.
I'll jump on that, Scott.
Please. I was going to say, I appreciate your openness. So Mike, jump right in there.
Chris, I think you're underplaying the issue of thread profile. I mean, I agree they're generally similar, and there's some sort of standard cancellous pitches out there and angles of the buttress threads. But what I think maybe you're not aware is that there are a lot of now double lead threads, quad lead threads, and that's a big deal because that will completely change what's going on. And if you put a double lead thread into a single pitch tapped hole, it's certainly not ideal. I would urge you to go back and look hard at that, and you might. I would just urge you to go back and look hard at that.
No, that's good feedback. I do appreciate that, Mike. One of the things that might provide some clarity there is the way we've designed this, obviously, because it has EMG and it's more for the surgery center setting. It is really for your bread and butter, posterior lumbar fusion surgeries, and where at least on the taps that we've seen there, that there's more conformity. But I will absolutely go back and take a look and and talk to the folks, my engineers, about the taps that they have and what they've applied to. Maybe and this is where my technical expertise kind of falls out here. This is really not my area, but maybe lateral has different types of, for the taps there, maybe something different. But your point is well taken, Mike. I'm definitely going to take this back to my engineers.
Yeah, good.
Fantastic. Why don't we go to Audrey next?
Thanks, Chris. First of all, congratulations. It's a nice looking product, and I like the strategy for the ASCs. Back in the day, years ago, as robotics and navigation were coming in for total joints, we might have termed this something like a poor man's navigation tool. Which
we've talked. Sometimes that's what we call it.
Yeah.
So,
which I think, has a play for the places that aren't going to make the big capital investment for whatever reason. My question, though, I'm curious if you've heard of a technology called Sentio that J&J purchased a few years ago and brought to market, and just how you see this with the needles going into the skin versus the skin, applied sensors. In terms of the impact to the patient and the usability for the surgeon and the patient.
Yeah, we know Sentio very well. They use a different technology called MMG, where, again, we use EMG. So MMG is newer. J&J says there's more sensitivity there. They use kind of more pad placement electrodes versus the needle electrodes that EMG would use. But I'll tell you, we have a lot of research here, and our lead neurophysiologist is not really high on the MMG technology right now, just because there's not a lot of data. It's newer. There's promise there. And so for us, using tried and true gold standard EMG that's been around for decades has helped us develop the device because people understand it and know it, especially when it comes to, as you brought up some good regulatory questions. It gives us a bevy of predicates to use for a regulatory strategy. So definitely know Sentio very well. They're a Midwest company. And it's early to really understand how good MMG is as opposed to EMG.
Great. Thank you.
Fantastic. John, will you hit cleanup for us?
Great. Well, Chris, my brothers and I have a saying, be careful what you ask for because you may get it. When you said you wanted unvarnished comment, but since this is my first time, I'll be a bit gentle. So what is...
But John, I don't know if I'm a fellow Detroiter like you, so you can punch as hard as you can.
So, but what is, you said that there was cost savings or cost benefit. You delineated that a bit for the hospital, but in the overall healthcare cost system, what's the value there, the true value proposition, that you bring? What's your planned ASP delta of using your product versus using a the neuromonitoring that's currently used?
That's a good question, John. We can save upwards of $3,000 right off the bat. And that includes, there's probably 2 or 3 single-use, disposable devices like a Jamsheedy, stuff like that you don't need to use. So that's a good $800 that you don't need to use. You got the neuromonitoring technician that you're paying out to typically some other company. The technical component is in the $1,500 to $2,000 range, and that's probably pretty conservative. So right there, you don't need to pay that out. Now the Jamsheedy and the disposables, yes, you can put those aside. But so with that, if we place the ASP of our device in, say, the $1,200 to $1,500 range, that takes care of the neuromonitoring technician fee that you're saving on, and giving room a couple $100, maybe up to $500 per case that at least that the facility can make money off it. Again, they're no longer giving it to a technician or mom and pop company that's doing the neuromonitoring. They keep that revenue themselves.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Well, fantastic, Chris. Thank you very much. It's a fascinating presentation. Hopefully you got the kind of discussion that you're looking for. If anybody wants to make direct contact because they're interested in either the technology or investment opportunity, as Chris mentioned, here's the contact information.